Hello, welcome everyone. Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause for being here. And welcome to History Café, uncovering Seattle's lost cemetery. And thank you to all of you who are here in person and also anyone who is joining us online on our live stream. So I am Rachel. I'm the Public Programs Manager here for a low to no vision audience. I'm a white woman with auburn hair, up in a bun, a plaid dress, and a black cardigan. Start with a few important notes about History Café. History Café is a wonderful partnership between MOHAI and HistoryLink. It happens every third Wednesday of the month, except for December. So welcome back, everyone who took a little December break from us. We're happy to see you again. And we encourage you, if you do not know anything about HistoryLink, our wonderful partner, you should go online because they are the largest free online encyclopedia of Washington State history. And just browsing around, you will learn so much. Important things to note: if you need the bathroom, it is straight back and then hang at a left, and it was beyond the deadly case. So tonight we're going to be exploring space, land, changing uses, and remembrances. And anytime we think about land, it's important to acknowledge that we, here at MOHAI and in Seattle, are on the historic and contemporary lands and waters, we're on pilings, of the Suquamish, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, and all Coast Salish people. Historically, Native communities were forcefully removed from this place, with lasting impacts on the water, land, and people. Therefore, it's important and critical that we hold deep respect and gratitude for their unbroken stewardship of this place. And we encourage you, if you don't know much about the local tribes, to go look them up online, go look their websites. Some of them have museums, go visit their museums to educate yourself. And now I am going to turn it over to our speakers for the evening from Invisible Histories. We have Elka Hatala and Carrie Simpson, and they're going to tell you more about themselves. So enjoy.
A long lane leads to the place. It is a quiet lane, traversed only by the dead wagons of undertakers on their occasional trips from the city. Through the entrance, the horses are driven into the waste of wild grass, weeds, and flowers. The driver finds his way between the graves, hidden beneath the tall growth, until the scene of the coming burial is reached. A casual visitor would hardly suspect this to be a cemetery, save for one or two crosses created by friends of those who have found the body of someone they knew here. There is no visible mark of a resting place. The lush grass hides everything. Walk through it and one will stumble over headboards. On these penciled inscriptions sometimes tell the names of the dead and sometimes simply register a number of the dead and the body of an unknown, giving the date of death. This is what you would have experienced had you found yourself at the Duwamish Cemetery, also known as the Potter's Field, in 1904. It's from the Seattle Times article that year describing the space.
And we are Invisible Histories. We're bringing history to life, one forgotten story at a time. And we like to say we know where the stories are buried. And I want to just describe on the screen, we have an image, a ghostly image with old-fashioned handwriting on top of the sheet and a rotten apple in their hand. And this is the model, Marie Wang, and it's meant to be anonymous in a way. And photoshopped into the image is the attestation about who was buried, or the number that was buried, rather, at the Duwamish Poor Farm Cemetery. So now we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. We just wanted to set the scene for you guys tonight and have you feel what it would have been like walking into this space back when it was still used as a cemetery. Okay, so here we are.
So this is Carrie Simpson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman with silver hair up in a bun on top of my head, wearing a black velvet shirt and a black skirt. And yeah, in front of me is some machinery from the Georgetown Steam Plant. I'm an environmental consultant and creative mixed media artist, catalyst, and producer, bringing big ideas to fruition by assembling diverse teams and partnerships. Currently, Invisible Histories podcast and production company provide a creative research and writing outlet for my interests of unearthing lost stories and bringing them to the public.
And I'm Elka Hadala. I'm a 47-year-old white woman with mostly green hair, wearing a polka dot top and black pants. On the screen, you can see an image of me performing, and I'm in a black box theater space wearing a black dress and a black hat with blonde hair, and there's red and purple lighting. So I'm a filmmaker, a performing artist, and I have a visual anthropology master's degree, so I'm very excited about the intersection between all these pieces. I have a passion for public history as well, and my work manifests in many different forms. Everything from feature documentaries. I actually have one coming out later this year that you'll be able to see if you want to. It's called Kuik, The Magic of Noise, and it's about a local Seattle indigenous band overcoming cultural genocide by performing and creating music. Kuik is the Tlingit word for inviting people or sharing culture. And we also put together theatrical productions at the Georgetown Steam Plant. We did a speculative fiction salon on Nikolai Tesla. That was very exciting. And I do audiovisual pieces as well, like 3,260 Souls, an experimental film that showed at Northwest Film Forum's Cadence Video Poetry Festival. But that's enough about us. Or actually, let's talk a little bit about what we do with how Invisible Histories was formed. Carrie?
Yeah, so this is Carrie again. We formed Invisible Histories over a year ago now, as an exciting way this is an exciting way to spend our anniversary.
Yes, thank you for spending our anniversary with us.
Elka had just finished her master's, and we both found so much enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning in this type of research and bringing these stories to life. And so we decided we would jump in with both feet and form a company that specialized in creating unique public engagement experiences out of historical research. And that's a fancy way of saying that we want to share how history is connected with the past and with audiences of today. So we do everything from presentations like this to our monthly podcast, which is available wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as audiovisual pieces and even larger scale theatrical productions and tours. And more on that after the end of our tour or speech.
Yeah, not yet. We'll be doing the tours in April, but we would love for you to join us then. Okay, so let's get into the exciting details. All right, on the screen, it shows an overlay of a 1907 map of Georgetown and the Duwamish River. Oh, thank you, Carrie, from the King County Archives. And it's in its original form with names and boundaries for the Potter's Field at the bottom center there. So see, it actually, oh, thank you, Potter's Field down there. And you can see up at the top here, it says Orchard and Poor Farm up here. So that's kind of where that space was. Don't worry, we will be telling you all about the meaning of these spaces and places as we move along. So go ahead and click again. Welcome to Uncovering Seattle's Lost Cemetery, a Potter's Field along the Duwamish River. And yeah, perfect. So we want to set the scene for you. We're going to take you on a journey with us today through space, time, and history. So I'll give you a little bit about what to expect, and then we'll dive right in. Okay, Carrie will cover our journey as emerging historians, how we came to dive into this story with our passion for public history, and illuminate the evolution of the landscape over time through maps. So all of you who love hearing about maps and what they mean, we'll be diving into that. And I will be back to talk about the people and their stories. That's something that always fascinates me. Just how one ended up in the potter's field while sharing some of the specific stories from the margins. And Carrie will delve into what happened to the 3,260 souls buried in the cemetery, including the investigation afterwards. Yes, there was an investigation. Stay tuned for that. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this story. We'll have a surprise interlude where we may break with the space-time continuum. More on that later. And finally, we'll connect the past to today and discuss what social impact actions we can all take. Carrie and I feel very strongly about not only helping people learn and understand and engage with history, but look at how it connects to today and think about what we can do to create social impact. Okay, Carrie, do you want me to take the clicker? Yeah. All right, let's talk about terms.
Yes, so a few terms. So this is important for tonight. So you might think a cemetery and a graveyard are the same thing because they're used interchangeably in our day-to-day vernacular. But a graveyard is a burial area connected to a place of worship, most likely a church. On the left, you can see a picture showing a historic churchyard in Ireland with graves next to the church, and that's typically what you think of with a graveyard. A cemetery is a burial area unaffiliated with a place of worship. Both religious and non-believers can be buried there, and it can be public or privately owned. And so on the right, there's a picture showing the Laurel Grove Cemetery located in Port Townsend, which I highly recommend visiting when you go there. It's an image of the Chetskamoka grave marker and the Chimickan Trail marker, and Laurel Grove Cemetery actually has a potter's field, which now is covered in trees due to neglect, and the Jefferson County Historical Society is working to research who was buried there and do a similar memorial process like we're talking about here. And then a potter's field is a name from the 17th century institution based on a biblical reference to a place where potters dug for clay, and thus a place conveniently full of holes for the burial of strangers or those who people didn't know. And then the last word is indigent, which means a poor person in need of services.
All right, we have an exciting slide coming up here with a couple of important images to set the scene for you. So we are talking about the time period when the cemetery was finally erased. It's the progressive era. It's the beginning of the 20th century here in America, and it was indeed a time of progress by some standards, movement, change, and growth. Here are 3 images on the slides that exemplify this epoch, defined from approximately 1900 to 1929. We have the largest image over there on the far side from me. It's a black and white one. Oh, is this not working? No, the clicker. Sorry. Here, Carrie is going to be my pointer. Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, largest image over there on the far side is workers in old clothes digging in a dry, dusty pit area. This does have a connection, and it's actually the creation of the Panama Canal in 1913 from the Library of Congress, which was influential in the thinking of the time about dredging and straightening and creating more industrialization. And so on the other side of the slide, on the top, we've got a black and white image of a white farmhouse next to the large, meandering Duwamish River with a fence and a horse-drawn carriage next to the house. It's a bucolic scene that illustrates what Georgetown and early Seattle looked like post-colonization, but pre-industrialization. Beneath this image is another black and white one. I love this one, with 2 women in an early convertible 2-seat roadster car. They're wearing hats, smiling, and one is carrying a large bouquet of flowers. This is Nell Richardson and Alice Burke. They drove from New York to San Francisco to promote women's suffrage. And there actually is a really good children's book on this as well. You can tell I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old at home. This is one thread in the progress side of the progressive era, activism for women's rights. Cities arose during this time. Many new immigrants arrived. World War I broke out, automobiles came into more common usage, an organized conservation movement developed along with many reforms, some destined for long-standing effects, such as unions and women's suffrage, some burning brightly for a brief instant, then replaced, such as prohibition. And what was happening in Seattle at the time? The city literally grew in size. They were doing a lot of annexing, including Southeast Seattle, South Park, Columbia, Ballard, West Seattle, Ravenna, and Georgetown. Of course, the locals will recognize these names as neighborhoods in the city today. And on August 17th in 1907, we actually had Pike Place Market open. And from their website, 6 to 12 farmers brought their produce-filled wagons to Pike Place on opening day. I'm not sure if they were throwing with the fish back then, but it still was a really exciting opening, and they sold out by lunchtime. Italian and Japanese immigrants were very influential in the produce and goods available at the market. So there was a railroad expansion as well, and the 13th federal census in 1910 showed Washington's population growing at many times the national average. Okay, a fact close to my heart when we're talking about Nell Richardson here and her friend, women won the right to vote in 1910, and by 1912, the first women had been elected to statewide office, even earlier than the national amendment. The Municipal League was founded for governmental and candidate oversight. Unions were formed, strengthened, and used their power to strike. Everyone from bill posters to musicians to forest and mill workers. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and roses and great progress, though. Racism reared its ugly head. If you look at the anti-Hindu riots up and down the coast, where white mill workers fought back with physical violence against what they saw as the East Indian threat to their job security. Sometimes there was progress fighting against racism, though. If you look at the case of Samuel and Susie Stone, a black couple who won the right to live in the exclusive Mount Baker neighborhood. And of course, we can't forget the AYP, or Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition. It was an early World's Fair that was held on the grounds of what would become the future University of Washington, with landscape designs by the Olmsted brothers. Their names are going to come up again, so be on the lookout. Okay, well, that's enough context, right? All of this push and pull, though, you get it. The tension between promise and progress, but for whom? Who gets to define it or decide it? Who gets a seat at the table, and who's just along for the ride? And Carrie will tell us a little bit about our mystery in Georgetown and how we got involved and became accidental public historians in a way.
Yeah, so this is Carrie, and yeah, how we became accidental historical researchers and approached this mystery. So during my time as the producer of the Friends of Georgetown History's Georgetown Haunted History Tour, I'd heard many a tale over the years of bodies being dumped in the river or some ashes being thrown around from an old cemetery. Many people know about the Comet Lodge Cemetery located near Georgetown, but this was a different place. Stories of ashes being scattered in the river have haunted the tour for years. And people remembered hearing about a cemetery near the old King County Hospital, but the details were few. Was any of this true? But so during the pandemic, literally dying of boredom, I happened to find this 1905 Army Corps map, which clearly showed at the bottom county graveyard, kind of down at the, yep. And that started me down a rabbit hole leading to being with you here tonight.
And so we contacted MOHAI and Seattle Municipal Archives and UW Special Collections and Seattle Public Library, looking for what we could find, especially images. We really wanted to try to find images or document references to the cemetery, but everything we could find usually was much later and not so specific. It was about that area down there, but nothing related to a cemetery. Our first big lead was at King County Archives. We want to do a big shout out to Danielle for her help there. It was a surreal experience, though, because we went not long after. It was towards the end of the pandemic in a way. I mean, it was
but
still...
we were still masked.
Yeah, we were still masked, and so it was surreal going there, and we were feeling very much the restrictions of the time, but we were able to see and touch with gloves the actual exhumation registry from 1912, which showed us the number of people buried there. 855 with names, 493 with only numbers, and 1,912 with no mark, headboard, or numbers. And I think it's kind of eerie, right? I kind of couldn't believe that last number because it's the year that it was erased. 1,912. It's really amazing, but that's the number. These statistics were glaring evidence of the mistreatment of people who lived and died in Seattle up through 1912 on the margins. This really lit the fire in us to learn more about who was buried there and what happened to them. And it turned out to be the first big turning point and an epiphany moment for our research.
So this is Carrie again. So what happened to the Duwamish Cemetery, also known as the Potter's Field? How does a cemetery just disappear in Seattle? So over the next few slides, I'm going to take you through the changes in the land from when the glacier last retreated 14,000 years ago up through today. And just to remind ourselves, maps can totally lie, and they are created by the people who made them to tell their own story, but they also point to what's been hidden and forgotten for such a long time. So we love maps. So this lay of the land. So on the right is an image of the water lines map, and we just had a wonderful presentation by Amar Sheikh today. So I wish he was here in the room, but maybe he's watching on YouTube right now. The water lines map created in 2004, which distinctly shows the landscape of the Duwamish Valley pre-contact and pre-colonization around 1851, a snapshot in time. So prior to European and Euro-American settlement and land claims in Seattle in 1851, there were 5,300 acres of tidal mudflats, wetlands, in what we call the Duwamish Valley today, and Georgetown. Puget Sound Coast Salish people have been here and still are here since the end of the last ice age 14,000 years ago, and by the 19th century were living in hundreds of longhouses and villages around in the area of the mouth of the Duwamish River up through today's Renton and Auburn. And on the left is an 1862 Government Land Office survey map overlaid with a satellite map, I believe from 1932, and this was created by Amar Sheikh in 2014. Inside the obvious double-lobed shape of what we know today as the Georgetown neighborhood is land that was then known as King County, and what became the King County Poor Farm and Hospital, and you'll learn more about that shortly. And from research on findagrave.com, which, love them, the Duwamish Cemetery from 1876 to 1912 was located on a knoll overlooking the Duwamish River at the King County Hospital and Poor Farm. So I deduced from reading that and looking at the map, and obviously the other map from 1905, that the Potter's Field was located inside this upper lobe, and we could go visit that location today. So next slide. And this is, the map on the left is the one you saw with Elka on the previous slide, but this is the 1907 King County Roads map that we got from the King County Archives that clearly shows the Potter's Field outlined on the map. In just under 35 years, from 1876 to 1912, over 3,260 bodies were buried at the Duwamish Cemetery, also known as the King County Poor Farm Cemetery and also known as the Potter's Field. The three names kind of made it difficult doing research because it was trying to look at multiple names, and I think back then there just wasn't one name for this place. So at the end of August 1911, the King County right-of-way agent was instructed to find a new location for the Potter's Field and purchased the same, the old location being on the right-of-way of the Duwamish Canal. Seattle wanted its own Panama Canal to allow ocean-going ships and industries to have access to currently, quote-unquote, useless land. However, we never found records that the county ever purchased or even found another location for a potter's field. And just some additional neighborhood context, on January 8th, 1904, Georgetown incorporated as its own city, but would be the last independent city to become annexed into the city of Seattle, much to the neighborhood's disappointment, through a vote in 1910. As our research began, we connected with Daniel Coyle at King County Archives and found this map from 1907, which showed the potter's field. And then and on that map, you can see the outline of today's East Marginal Way, which runs along kind of north-south-ish, connecting to Corson Street, which is seen as Charleston Avenue on there. And inside that triangle is where today's South Seattle College is located. So by 1912, So the map on the right now was from 1912. So this is just a few years later. The potter's field is no longer shown. All the Poor Farm buildings are still shown, including the orchards, fences, greenhouses, and outbuildings. The dark cross-shaped building you can see on the 1912 map is the King County Crematorium, which was especially built to cremate all 3,260 human remains, or what was left, in the potter's field. Dredging of the Duwamish River began in 1913, and per some research through the Army Corps, the old location of the potter's field was where they began to stage the dredging equipment. One more map. Ooh. So one on the screen is a 1921 map of Georgetown from King County Road Services. So now, 10 years later or so, the now straightened Duwamish River is flowing north on the upper left corner of the map crop, running parallel to East Marginal Way. The lost potter's field is below the industries and rail lines shown in the bottom left corner. The crematorium is still on the map on the Poor Farm property, which looks like a black cross. And the brick King County Hospital is on the corner of Corson and South Michigan Street, below on the bottom right corner. And for those the roadside attractions of Seattle, on the corner of East Marginal and South Corson, you can see the future gas station site of the Hat and Boots Premium Tex gas station, known as the Hat and Boots, which was moved by the Georgetown community to its place today at Oxbow Park. So, and this is where we hope to be doing our live tour of this area, showing you what is no longer there in an interesting way, and we'll talk more about that. So one final map on the screen now, made by Eric Anderson, who is a local archaeologist who we connected with during our research. This shows the 1907 map overlaid on the modern streetscape with the Potter's Field property highlighted in yellow. And for those who want to go down there right now, after tonight, the address of the Potter's Field location is 500 South Myrtle Street, just north of Seattle Iron and Metals and under today's Seattle Boiler Works. Some would say it's haunted. Right. Definitely haunted.
We wonder if they've seen interesting stuff there, but we did go by and tell them about the tour, of course, because it's going to be right by their location. I think they were like, "You're doing what?" But they were actually very nice about it too. Excited to see what we're doing. Yes, okay. Thank you, Carrie. And all right, so this is Elka, and there are two images on the screen. On the right is a black and white copy of an early watercolor drawing from one of the Sisters of Providence, more about them in a moment, showing how the King County Poor Farm was set up. The other color image is most likely a painting of what the Poor Farm looked like around 1877, and it seems a very promotional image, almost like a southern plantation, with a tall white house capped by a reddish roof, white and blue sky. You know we don't get that much blue sky around here, except this winter, right? Green grass and a tree in the foreground, along with one couple in period dress of dark blue and tan. It's very well manicured and serene. So this is the evolution of the King County Poor Farm. One question we ask ourselves was, how does one end up in the Duwamish Poor Farm Cemetery? Well, you were often on the margins of society without money or means, and two key places emerged. So one, of course, was the King County Poor Farm, and we'll tell you about the other one in a moment. So thanks to Terry Mitchell, a former Providence Hospital archivist, we have a basic timeline on the circuitous route this evolution took. It all started with the best of intentions. The county must take care of its poor. There was an 1854 law that stated this, but the question became, how would they accomplish it? The King County Board of Commissioners would set a formal meeting to individually deal with each pauper case. Some of their solutions seem misguided through a modern lens. There was a June 3rd, 1856 auction where pauper Edward Moore was essentially sold. As Mitchell states, the lowest bidder agreed to provide shelter and food for the person in need in exchange for payment from the county and use of the person's labor if he or she was able to work. They did have some early doctors contracted to help the sick, but they also paid to send the poor away to places like San Francisco and Hawaii, out of sight, out of mind. Although if you saw the news recently, New Orleans actually is doing that very same thing now, today. So it just, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. The dramatic increase in those in need coming to the city led to a decision to institute the Poor Farm, where people without means could work and they could create some self-sufficiency through farming. That was the thinking at the time. This system was supposed to teach morals and skills, but it also benefited the commissioners by creating a compulsory system that stepped away from review on a case-by-case basis. So we initially thought that once the Poor Farm was put into place, although its ownership changed hands, it was pretty much the same iteration. But we've recently learned that was not necessarily the case. There was much more fluctuation over its lifespan, and it all started with one woman, Mother Joseph of the Sacred Heart, or more accurately, a group of women, French-Canadian nuns to be exact. Okay, next slide, please. And you can go ahead and put the pictures on. So this is still Elka. There are two sepia-toned images on this slide for 3,260 souls lost and found, which is, of course, we already mentioned, the number buried in the cemetery in 1912. On the far side is a country scene with a White House and fence, even a cow. It's an Ashel Curtis image of the original hospital and farm from 1909. On the side closest to me is a large brick building with a sidewalk leading to it and early roadsters parked out front. Okay, so King County assumed ownership of the 160 acres of farmland about 5 miles south of Seattle from John Thompson, who had died without heirs in 1869. And it had been part of the original Luther M. Collins claim. The commissioners visited it in 1877 and found it well suited to their purposes, although there was pushback about the idea from some editors in the press. The Poor Farm concept by this time, as Terry Mitchell states, was discredited as a social welfare tool on the East Coast. With the increase in population and those in need, the King County commissioners decided to move full steam ahead with their plan. Now they just needed someone to run it. They accepted Emil Cowton's bid of $300 a year and 75 cents per person per day. He then arranged for the Sisters of Providence, who were from Montreal, to run it. With their leader, Mother Joseph, they had already established hospitals and schools in areas like Vancouver, Washington, Portland, and Steilacoom. So she was said to be unafraid of doing what needed to be done and famously wielded a hammer while wearing her habit. She would fix what needed to be taken care of herself if need be. It's a great picture, right? Great mental image. They did treat 31 people in 14 months, mostly immigrants, but it was not an easy life. They had a separate sleeping annex to make sure they had space for the patients. They faced isolation, loneliness, hard labor at times, and they even faced prejudice from patients who preferred not to be treated by foreign Catholic nuns. By July 1878, they had gotten approval to move patients to a larger facility at Fifth Avenue in Madison that undoubtedly was much more to their liking. For almost a decade, there's this back and forth whenever the contract comes back up for review. But the farm stayed as a farm primarily, and the sisters kept taking care of the poor at their new hospital location. But in November 1886, the commissioners decided to transfer care back to the farm, and the sisters felt like this was likely due to prejudice. And I'm quoting from their Providence Chronicles, "We deplore this decision because our poor and elderly patients would have to leave us and once more be taken care of by Protestants." By 1888, Dr. Charles Merrick was running the poor farm and even burying the dead at no extra charge, no doubt in the potter's field. So the building here closest to me was built in 1895 at the request of the farm's third managing physician, and the farm then became separated from those in need of medical care once again. Within a year, it was providing a good amount of food for the hospital, though. The Post-Intelligencer in June 1895 talked about its bounty, 16 acres of potatoes, berries, apples, beans, peas, peaches, and more. And we can go to the next slide for the end of that story. So this is still Elka, but it wasn't all about the bountiful harvest, let's just say. What was it actually like to live and die there? We do have a glimpse into that. It conjures up images of Dickensian austerity, right, when you hear the term poor farm. An article in the Seattle Daily Times from 1907 by Walter Defenbaugh, although solidly situated in the biases of the time, does provide us an illuminating glimpse. So the image closest to me is a black and white newspaper cover from that article. And it's titled "Over the Hill to the Poorhouse." Thank you, Carrie, with a drawing of old-fashioned workers on a farm, framing several images of patients in hospital beds, the brick hospital, and the older poor farm structures and farmland. So some there were old, most feeble, some blind, some were young men temporarily disabled. They had, in Walter Defenbaugh's words, saloons and mocking real estate signs on one side, and the wet, winding river and dreary pines on the other side. It doesn't sound like a very bountiful place in his description. About 30 people on the 90 acres farm. They would have to work, too, if they could, weed, prepare vegetables. 140 in the hospital at that time, give or take. Those who could work there would work too, in the kitchen, scrubbing the floors, sweeping, watering the lawn, almost all men. In a striking quote, highlighting women of a certain age's long struggle for agency and visibility, Mr. Defenbaugh says, "There is no good place in this country to send an unfortunate old lady whose only affliction is her years and her inability to earn a living." I know, right? But okay, there was a silent killer in their ranks that struck fear into the hearts of all, but I'm not talking about a person. By 1900, Seattle had one of the highest incidences of tuberculosis per capita in the United States, and patients with communicable diseases, including influenza, were sent here. So that's the picture on the other side, actually furthest from me. The Georgetown Sanatorium housed patients on land surrounding the King County Hospital from 1903 to 1911, where the Georgetown South Seattle College campus is today. And yes, I did say on land surrounding, not in the actual hospital, because due to the medical understanding and practices of the time, patients were housed in open-air tents on platforms backed up over the Duwamish River and on top of the drain pipes. Another wonderful Ashel Curtis image there, and it shows the sanatorium in 1909. It's sepia-toned photograph with the larger hospital building in the background, along with an orchard and the temporary tents with roofs right on the edge of a muddy bank with wooden pilings and the river below. The structures are reflected in the water, creating a beautiful symmetry in this moment in time from what must have been in reality a very troubling place. So from the Seattle Daily Times, Poor fellas who lie all day and all night in the big tents out along the riverbank, with curtains pulled up high on every clear day, and not a passing human being to break the monotony. Nothing but the petty little lapping of the foolish river to make one moment different from the next, and no one to care whether the moment 3 heartbeats away will be their last. So pretty grim. There were 16 men there at the time of the article, not just American, but British, Scandinavian, Filipino, and Japanese. Some couldn't even speak English. And most people died coughing in the cold, foggy, foul conditions by the river. Then, unless a family member came to claim the body, well, they were buried in the potter's field, just along the shoreline to the right of this photo. So the Seattle Star newspaper did an investigative report, which led to a grand jury investigation that did eventually find the conditions inhumane and the management horrific. When we dove into the King County archives, we were able to look at reports and the investigation by the state auditors into just how terrible the King County Hospital and sanatorium situation was, including actual testimony from former workers and patients. Just to give you an example, one time there was a worker and a nurse helping carry a man who had supposedly passed away, and when the worker discovered that his hand was still warm, he immediately mentioned this, right? Like anybody would. The nurse retorted that he was surely dead now, and come on. Or the patient who spoke with the investigative reporters only to be told by the staff he was to be given only bread and water, and that maybe that would teach him to keep his mouth shut. Grim stuff. The silver lining in all this was, though, that it eventually led to reforms like the Anti-Tuberculosis League, formed the very year of this picture, the one on the far side, 1909, which led to King County Public Health creating a new sanatorium in Fircrest, which is just north of Seattle, in the city of Shoreline, for those who are not local. And next slide. I promise Carrie's going to get to talk again. So this is still Elka. One thing we ask ourselves, where are the women? This is what we thought as we began to delve into the names that we found in the exhumation registry from the King County Archives. We thought about female presence and visibility. There are black and white images of 3 newspaper articles on this slide titled, Mrs. Lake Shot Twice, Husband Disappears, and Miss Dugan, Young Unmarried Woman Dies Under Strange Circumstances in Hospital. I mean, it sounds like we could be reading from the Hollywood Star today, right? There is a grainy drawing of a photo of Mary Dugan, kind of tough to see there, but she's a young woman in a large circular old-fashioned hat with dark hair pulled back, wearing a jacket and cravat. So with the help of local history buffs, Rose and Patty, our volunteers, a big thank you and shout out to them, we did find many articles that cross-referenced with the Potter's Field and the names of the people buried there, but the amount and type of information turned out to be quite a challenge for a number of reasons. First, we found that the community would often help to raise money to bury women and children elsewhere. There was a stigma with being interred there. Remember, this was a time, too, when women were still referenced by their husbands' names and they had a lot less potential records to investigate, so that was a challenge as well. And nevertheless, we were able to find key news stories on several women with less than stellar fates. We really only have what is listed in the newspaper to go on, though. And it's important to understand that this is framed from a specific viewpoint, not only from the historical context of the times and the social mores, but also often with the intent of selling newspapers, right? And it may not accurately reflect the women or their actual lived experience. So here's a quick summary of the 3 women on the slide. Let's see here. So Mary Lake was embroiled in what I like to call the Melrose Place thriller of the early 1900s. She was part of a love triangle that ended tragically. All 3 were buried in the Potter's Field, linked together by eternity. We may be hearing from Mary Lake later tonight. You never know. Mrs. Leah Lynn's story is that of a jilted lover with a twist. I like how they still find it germane to mention in the article about her that she was a pretty woman of 28 years. Mrs. Mary Dugan's story is shrouded in mystery. She was a young domestic worker who went into convulsions and ended up at the Wayside Mission Hospital. And we don't even know if that was her real name or whether she actually ended up in the Potter's Field. Her name never actually cross-referenced with the transcribed list. But you never know. She could have been buried under a different name. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is Elka one more time, and I want to give a trigger warning on this slide that there is racist material. We are also following the threads to find out more about marginalized people buried there in the cemetery from diverse populations. There are images of 3 black and white documents on this slide, a census record with lots of tiny details, handwritten, then copied. I've highlighted the pertinent entry down there in purple, a prison record copy, also with tiny handwritten details. Both look similar to the entries in a journal or logbook. And finally, there's a newspaper article with the title, "Old Hominy Dies as He Lived." So this is all about James Carter. He is another interesting story that we actually hope to be able to find out more about. He was definitely buried in the Potter's Field, and there is a March 17th, 1902 newspaper article that you can see up on the screen. I'm not going to quote it because it's very biased and racist, but it does help us find more possible clues about his life and who he was. We know he was a runaway enslaved person who escaped from the South to Seattle. He struggled with alcoholism. He was on the poor farm for at least part of his life, and he had been arrested. So we really wanted to find out more insight into his life from his perspective. So we reached out to Ethel Marie and Stephanie Johnson Tolliver at the Black Heritage Society. I highly recommend getting in touch with them and finding out about all the wonderful archival materials that they have. So the census document is from the 12th one in 1900. There is a James Carter listed on there as head of household who was from Virginia. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to verify if it is the same man. Common name, right? So it's tough. There's also a prison record from around the same time, also for a James Carter. Could be him. So Ethel Marie let us know that there is a well-known local black family by the name of Carter from Virginia, and we're looking to connect further with a local scholar who has been following the threads of this family to see if we can find out additional details. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Carrie here.
And actually, sad news for those that do know Ethel Marie. We did find out Ethel Marie passed away, I believe, the weekend right before Thanksgiving, unexpectedly. And yeah, it's sad that we didn't get another chance to meet with her before. So if you know people with stories, meet with them as soon as you can. Don't let it go because, yeah. Yes. So another person of real interest to us is Ingo Singh, born in 1868, who died in 1908. And he's one of these great mysteries of the Potter's Field. He was listed as 40 years old on his death notice, which is in the upper right corner. This is the death notice from the paper. And guess who else was born around the same time? Mahatma Gandhi was born in the same year in India, on the 2nd of October, 1869, who became the future leader of India. So we don't know exactly where Ingo was born. We know he was of the Sikh religion, and we can guess of how and why he ended up in the area. From Sikh.net, the first well-known record of Sikhs visiting the Pacific Northwest was 1897. They were soldiers for the British Army, British Empire, who traveled through Canada on their way back home after Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. Sikhs saw potential in this place, and not long after, mostly male laborers made their way here. Most were British citizens, and many were more former soldiers. So there were lots of articles, like we had mentioned earlier, the anti-Hindu riots. There was a lot of unhappiness with laborers coming in from other countries and taking jobs away. And one of these articles from September 16th, 1906 is titled, "Have We a Dusky Peril? Hindu Hordes Invading the State," with echoes of current racist beliefs and discussions around immigrants from Mexico or Central America and other places. So this is a reminder, there's always been this fear, the fear of difference, the fear of being taken away, jobs being taken away, and that mistreatment, hate, and violence often follow, as we can see from this 1907 anti-Hindu riots that were happening in Bellingham. So we don't know if Ingo had been in Bellingham and was perhaps on his way home when he became sick or injured, but one discovery we made was that on his death certificate listed the Wayside Mission Hospital as where he passed away. Mary Dugan also went there to receive medical care before she died. On April 1st, 1899, so the Wayside Mission Hospital, for those that don't know, was this, side wheeler. April 1st, 1899, a group of philanthropic citizens, including Dr. Alexander De Soto, formed the Seattle Benevolent Society, which purchased the decommissioned side-wheeler steamboat Idaho and retrofitted it as an emergency hospital for Seattle's indigent population. The Idaho was placed on pilings alongside the Pacific Coast Steamship Company's Pier C at the foot of South Jackson Street and was reopened as the Wayside Mission Hospital. In 1907, due to structural failures, go figure, the Idaho was abandoned and the hospital activities moved ashore near 2nd Avenue and Republican Street under today's Seattle Center fountain. Whew. It's possible that Ingo never made it past the waterfront, but we can imagine a little bit more about his final days with this information in this picture. We cover Ingo Singh and others buried in the Potter's Field in our 3rd podcast episode, Marginalized Voices, which first aired on January 2nd, 2024, if you would like to get much more into his story. So here's one more. This is another really interesting person buried in the Potter's Field. This is Thomas Hamilton Blank, born in 1870 and died in 1895, only 25 years old. An illustration of Thomas on the left. He's drawn as a young man wearing a dark suit and short, light-colored hair. He was born in New York and known as the Jesse James of the Pacific Northwest for killing at least 5 people from California to British Columbia and dying in a gunfight just before his 25th birthday. In October 1894, he had been convicted in King County Superior Court of the murder of bartender Charles H. Bridwell, and was sentenced to hang on December 7th. But the case was appealed and his execution was stayed. Must have had a good lawyer. He spent his nights in the Katzenjammer Castle, this picture on the right, which was Seattle's 2nd City Hall, photographed here in 1909. This photo shows the 3rd Avenue facade of the Seattle City Hall with its many seemingly haphazard additions. The doors are open to the fire station, center right, below the fan molding, right there. That year, most of the city offices moved to the new public safety building, and this Katzenjammer Castle was named for a famous cartoon of the time called the Katzenjammer Kids. So while in jail, this is talk about a wasted life, or wasted talents. Over 3 months, while in jail, he secretly crafted a replica Smith & Wesson double-action revolver, his favorite weapon. Using a knife made from a steel shank in his shoe, Blank whittled and shaped the pieces, then smoothed them with pieces of broken glass. The model was held together with matchsticks, thread, chewing gum, and soap, and blackened with a mixture of grease and soot. To add authenticity, Blank fabricated realistic bullets out of tinfoil packed with tobacco and inserted into the cylinder. Having painstakingly worked on his craft project for 3 months, he was ready to implement his escape plan. At 7:30 on March 17th, 1895, the night jailer left his office and approached the pass-through in the steel tank to deliver a nightly dose of medicine to a prisoner. Blank pulled the imitation gun on him from under his shirt and stuck it through the bars and told the jailer to surrender or be immediately killed. And the jailer gave up his keys, gave up his gun, and Thomas escaped. He went on the lam for 5 days, was ultimately killed in a shootout with police. The coroner determined he was slowly dying of pneumonia from being on the run in the cold Pacific Northwest elements. And according to Seattle Post-Intelligencer, at least 18,000 people filed past his coffin at the Butterworth Funeral Home. Imagine that. The street in front of the undertaking rooms was crowded all day from early morn until evening, and so great was the pressure on the doors, despite the efforts of the police, that the public was admitted long before the intended time. Almost as many women as men took advantage of the opportunity to get a look at the greatest Northwest criminal, and one woman even kissed him, according to the newspaper. Blank was unceremoniously buried at the Potter's Field at the end of March 1895 with only a concrete post bearing his registry number. So I would encourage you to listen to our third episode of our podcast where we delve into this story much more. There's a lot to share, but we need to keep moving. So this is Carrie again. So now, after you've learned about the lives of some of those buried in the Potter's Field, let's get back to 1912 and the Poor Farm and the old Potter's Field, slated for removal by the end of the year. So in the summer of 1912, the county built a crematorium next to the Potter's Field, pictured here, on land that is now under today's Georgetown campus of South Seattle College. On the left side, the image is an architectural drawing from 1912 from as-builts included with the King County Roads map vault that we got. The architect was J.W. Lawton, who also built some buildings on the UW campus, and he was famous at the time. The county hired him to build this beautiful building. This is no ordinary industrial crematorium. This is an elaborate Gothic-styled brick building with rosette windows and an adjoining chapel. The county even hired the famous Olmsted brothers to create a landscape plan for the grounds of the crematorium on the western edge of the Poor Farm. The image on the right shows a 1913 landscape architectural plan for the crematorium grounds, including plans for a lush landscape of plants and trees. The county clearly wanted to show that they could spend the proper amount of money to care for the people buried in the Potter's Field, so everything seemed above board, right? This is how the county has its beautiful new chapel. Yeah, so the county has its beautiful new chapel and crematorium on the Poor Farm property, but this is where intention perhaps becomes misaligned with implementation. We all know when this happens. It's now the end of 1912. Picture it, Seattle, November. Cold, clammy, overcast, the smoky air from local industries blocking out the meager sun. The county had entered a contract with Mr. Noyce, the undertaker of the Georgetown Funeral Home, to disinter all 3,260 people who'd been buried there. Mr. Noyce also happened to be a leader of the Oddfellows Comet Lodge right there in Georgetown. At the same time frame, he and Dr. Corson from the King County Hospital also managed the sale of burial plots at the Comet Lodge Cemetery, of which they both were members. And the story didn't turn out so well there either, for those who've researched or visited the Comet Lodge on South Graham Street in Seattle, but that is a story for another day. But for the Potter's Field, he's tasked with disinterment, cremation, and columbarium storage of all 3,260 bodies from the Duwamish Cemetery. In November, they hired a crematorium assistant directly responsible to the county commissioners to have also issued rules for the crematorium operations. So this new crematorium could handle the 3,260 plus any other people that needed to be cremated at the time. So Mr. Noyce began the grim task to exhume and deliver 85 bodies per day to the crematorium. He was paid $2.50 per body, and which in today's dollars is about $87-ish. Removed from the field using skulls to keep count. In today's money, yeah, not enough probably for what he was trying to do. So imagine the task, to cremate all these bodies in just 39 days, many of which are decomposed beyond recognition. Mr. Noyce's contract stipulated that the bodily remains were each to be stored in individual cans and stored in the columbarium, which is like there's little shelves inside the crematorium where people could go and, I guess, visit the little cans. But unfortunately, the county purchased metal cans that were too small. So think soup cans versus baked bean cans, which is more what a human needs. The ashes, and so then there were stories of ashes being swept into communal cans, and due to the rush job and perhaps a shortage of labor, it all became a huge mess. And, so yes, the state auditor had to get involved. We mentioned that before. And what happened to the ashes was deemed beyond understanding in December of 1912. On the left, we show March 25th, 1913, Post-Intelligencer article, Say County Let Loose Contract. The reporter wrote that careless and unbusinesslike methods were used, including the ashes of as many as 163 bodies were raked on the floor of the county crematorium and distributed into individual receptacles purporting to bear the name of each deceased. Well, Mr. Noyce claimed that he was only hired to deliver every headboard to the crematory, and if these were destroyed, it was done after they left my possession. The state auditors recommended that the 3,260 receptacles containing mixed ashes of many bodies be discarded, that the ashes be placed in one receptacle, and that the fiction of a name on a can be removed from the columbarium shelves. This is likely exactly where the neighborhood lore around disposal of ashes into the Duwamish River probably came from. As of this writing, there is no evidence to explain what happened to the cremated remains of the 3,260 people in 1912. The crematorium continued providing cremations for another 20 years, but was dismantled in 1941 by the National Youth Administration as a training project, with equipment and materials salvaged and stored by King County. Can you imagine what might still be in King County storage somewhere?
Stan, you want to make contact with the other side, is that right? Yes? Any brave souls out there tonight? I am your agent of transmission, your clairvoyant medium, by the name of Madame Victoria, who will be your guide. Now, I'm wearing a long black dress and a black and pink shawl and a fancy black hat, but otherwise I quite resemble your Elka Hadala from your very large numbered year. What was it again?
2025.
2025, my goodness. And I understand Miss Carey from 2025 will also be helping us on our journey tonight. Now, you know, 50 cents is the usual price, but I'm willing to make an exception for you fine folks, provided you come see me at my regular place of business, room 14, the Abbott Hotel. Well, now you know the one, up by 3rd Avenue and Pike Street, right? It has me remembering my days when I used to go visit Mr. Coroner Hoy. His offices were right down from mine, and I'm sure you've undoubtedly heard his name or read about him in the papers for attending to the dead. And well, after the relatives went to visit him, it was only natural that they would want to come and see me, and I was always more than happy to oblige. Now, there has been a renewed interest in the otherworldly of late, what with our boys camping in the trenches overseas, many destined to come back in a pine box. But there is heartbreak on our shores, too. An ache that spans centuries, too many disturbed from their eternal slumber, not respected, sacrificed on the altar of greed. And I'm not talking about that bar down the street where they charge you too much for watered down drinks, right? No, Miss Carey has been telling you all tonight about the Duwamish Poor Farm Cemetery, right? They said it was wasted land. Even the whispers around Georgetown by the neighbors, they weren't so happy to have the indigent poor buried right in their backyard, and they wanted it gone. So they hired that scheming Mr. H.S. Noyce, in cahoots with Mr. Corson he was, and he did all the cremation and columbarium storage himself. Can you believe he got the wrong size containers? Oh, 3,260 of those souls' ashes. Just where did they end up? I bet it was in that Duwamish River it was. So tonight, we are holding a spiritual ceremony, a seance to remember, to appease the Pottersfield dead and make amends for disturbing their eternal slumber. But we're going to need some volunteers to help us do just that. 2 volunteers, in fact, to be vessels for our communion with the spirit world. Now, don't be shy. I'm sure some of you have wanted to be inhabited by a spirit once. Come on up. Miss Carrie's going to help me.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
2 people.
Don't worry. It doesn't hurt. It's quite easy. I can help guide you. Oh, yes, excellent. I love it. Welcome.
Here, come over
Come
here.
right over this way. We have seat. Actually, Miss Carrie will get you a little help there from the spirit realm. Okay, while they commune. So you guys may have had Madame Melly's life readings, right? Or Clifton the Great, I'm sure. But I will have you seeing spirits in no time. Not like their flivver, which leaves you feeling like a chump, right? Yes. Oh, I'm feeling a pretty strong energy in this room tonight. Have you guys communed with the spirits before? No one? Maybe in the back there? Oh, excellent. You know what it is? There is quite a bit of history in this space and place. Yes, the vibrations. I call upon the wisdom of the ages and the warnings in the ether. Connect me to the world beyond our own. Yes, we're going to need a little more energy here. Why don't I? Oh, goodness, the lights. Did you see that? I believe the spirits are already finding their way to us. But I think what we need to do is hold hands and chant. I will help start the chant, and you can follow me. Nitimor invetitum. We strive for the forbidden. Alea iacta est. The die has been cast. Oh, I'm feeling something already. A female energy. Yes, I feel fear and excitement. I'm meeting a man. His name is Thomas, and we have a strong connection. Mary Lake is my name. I see a sign. It says Fredonia House. But something is wrong. There's a disturbance. A knocking at the door. The door bursts open. It's my husband. The look on his face. Horror. Revulsion. He's got a gun. There's a loud bang, a pain in my neck and back, and then everything goes black. Oh, spirit realm. Yes, I'm feeling now that the spirit realm is speaking to you. Here, Miss Carrie will help you. Oh, what spirit will find its way to us here? The lights are flickering.
I just wanted a job with the city, you know, stable and all. Something not too strenuous like digging for the sewer lines, but not always sitting at a desk neither. When I saw the advertisement, I went in to apply right away. I was always fond of man's best friend, you know. You treat 'em right, and they'll reward you with unconditional love. Those dogs on the street often didn't have a chance without help. Dog catcher. It has such an old-fashioned ring to it, but yes, I suppose that's what I was for the last 3 years anyways. I was good at it, too. Sure, I was over 40 years in this life, but I did think I might have more time. I got the fever, and then the pneumonia took me. Maybe it was my always tramping about on the streets. Guess I'll always be known as the dog catcher now.
Oh, that poor soul, but now they are at rest. Let us take a moment. Yes, they have passed on on peacefully. Thank you for speaking with us tonight, Spirit. And now I'm feeling an energy over here. Let's see what Spirit comes through. Oh, goodness me.
I remember pain, confusion, a flurry of hands and movement. I was fading in and out of consciousness, my newly born child. Upon hearing that he was safe and well, I let go. They asked me questions, but I needn't answer. All was finally well. The man who once enveloped my life so greatly no longer mattered. They said betrayal, but I am beyond words. It was a lot like floating, being welcomed by my next life. My memories of that life have already retreated. I know I was called Helen, and my last moments were in that hospital on the waterfront. The one that used to be a side-wheeler. The women, they took up a collection for what they called a proper burial. They don't know that it doesn't matter where I am going.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, poor Spirit, pain at the end, but moving on to a glorious new life. Let us take a moment of silence to honor all 3,260 souls. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for our volunteers here. Give them a big round of applause. That was amazing, you guys. Thank you. Yes, wonderful. Thank you for playing with us tonight. So one of the things, we thought about as we did our historical research, and my background is a performing artist, so it's part of my practice, but we thought about how do we engage people with history, and not just the people that are willing to come out and hear us talk for over an hour tonight, but people who, might not have loved history in high school or might think it's not so interesting. And one of the ways we do that is through our artistic practice. And I'll just point out and describe briefly on the screen here to catch you guys up. This is the wonderful Abbott Hotel. We have a large brick building with many windows, a wide sidewalk, and several people in early 1900s period costume in front. And yes, Madame Victoria was an actual spiritualist medium during World War I. You can look up her ad in the back papers of the time, and that's what I've based my character on. And then beyond that, I take some liberties to make it my own, obviously. Just some, yeah, only some. And Corner Hoy, who is mentioned in really so many accounts of the time, did have offices in that same building, so we like to imagine they had a thing going. And then the other picture up there is me doing my seance for the Haunted History Tour the other year. That time I did have a crystal ball. Maybe it'll come back in the future here. So we can go to the next slide. And I just want to show you guys briefly. Yeah, so here's the 3 articles that we based our scripts on. So what we did is we collected these newspaper articles in an archive, and we chose 3 of them for tonight. We did 2 of them. One, you'll see there was actually dog catcher Nolan dead. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting outside the box one to do. And let me just tell you that some of them are pretty grim too. It starts reading like an Edward Gorey's Ways to Die at a certain point. So I'm kind of trying to bring it to stuff that's that's dramatic, but not too traumatic. And then we have, we didn't do Fritz, but we have Helen Wilson. And I thought that was just such a beautiful story in a way, very dramatic about what happened to her, albeit also very sad. And one of my favorite things is taking these articles and then writing a dramatic interpretation, and sometimes we make that into a full script where we would have more characters. But I love this idea of having people who come see us being a part of it, and we're hoping to do more immersive, interactive elements in the future. Now I actually do need my glasses back on to see though, now, 'cause
if you are interested in doing research, we have probably 700 names that could still be researched from old newspapers. So if you would like to volunteer with us, just reach out, come up and sign our list in the back or get our card. That's how Patty and Rose started working with us and helped us find a lot of really interesting people. So, but there's more to do. So.
And you can always volunteer to be a ghost, too. So this is Elka, and we can go ahead and click over to the next one. Okay. So who remembers these stories, places, and people? Is there a space and place for remembrance? These are questions that we ask ourselves. And we have two images on the screen, both black and white. One furthest from me is a falling down side wheel steamship that you've heard mentioned. It's docked by the skeletal outline of a framework of pilings where there used to be a pier. Several early Seattle buildings loom in the background of the scene, showing what the early 20th century waterfront looked like. And the other one closest to me shows two men in white outfits and one in black helping put simple pine box coffins in a large dusty hole in the ground. There are a few other men in the background, and the horizon is flat and far-reaching. So we mentioned Ingo Singh and Mary Dugan ended up at the Wayside Mission Hospital, and that was another place that might have been your final stop before the Potter's Field. And Carrie told you a little bit about how it was formed. Another thing that's pretty interesting is that later on, during the construction of a seawall along Seattle's south waterfront between 1910 to 1920, the Idaho, the old sidewheeler, was moved and buried all as fill near the foot of Washington Street. And in 1960, on National Maritime Day, a historical marker was placed at the location of its resting place. The marker reads, and this is from Archives West, "Beneath your feet lies the wreckage of the pioneer sidewheel steamer Idaho, which served from 1900 until 1909 as Dr. Alexander DeSoto's famous Wayside Mission Hospital. Here, Dr. DeSoto ministered to the needs of seafarers and the destitute, donating his time and funds to their care." Now we have thousands of tourists and locals walking along the regraded, reshaped, and renovated waterfront without much connection to what has come before. We want to create ephemeral and built environment spaces for remembrance. I do especially love the idea that the Idaho is part of the fill, forever holding up the space, just like it supported so many people in the early 1900s. Another Potter's Field that you're likely familiar with is Hart Island. That's this image on this side here. And I think if you click, there is another note about it, right, with Hart Island? There we go. Yeah, Hart Island in New York City, somewhere between 850,000 to 900,000 poor, homeless, or forgotten people are buried there. So we're talking staggering numbers, making it the largest public cemetery in the world. And that's from NewYorkHistory.org, that quote. It has a darkly secretive past that reflects many of the tragic seasons of our history here, including the HIV/AIDS crisis and more recently COVID-19. Up until fairly recently, it was off limits to almost all visitors, even if you knew someone that was buried there. And now there's limited access. It's now run by the Parks Department, but it was previously run by the Department of Corrections with inmates from Rikers doing all the burial work. So it was very secretive and like secluded. No one really knew in some ways what was going on there or how many people were buried. The amazing thing is the Hart Island Project is doing an incredible job using new media to create an interactive digital map, which we can share with anyone who's interested, of those buried in the cemetery. And I love this idea of remembrance as well, beyond physical space. And they use crowdsourcing to create collective memory by asking anyone who can to give their information about people who could be buried there. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and you can click on the other photo. So this is still Elka. Now, we're coming back from our time traveling adventure, ignore my clothing. To the present time and place, we've determined where the cemetery was, the diversity and complexity of who was buried there, and the reality that there may never be an easy answer to where the ashes ended up. And in the end, it's most likely true that they were swept into the river, raked into the potato fields, like the oral history tells us. We know the whole operation was catastrophically mishandled, but what does this all mean for us? On the screen is the image of a gray cemetery plaque in the ground, surrounded by green grass and purple, yellow, and red, white cut flower arrangements. And it says, "Gone, but not forgotten. These people of King County, August 2022. I took this picture when I attended the Indigent Remains Burial Program ceremony at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Renton. And it was in 2022. In the upper right corner is an image from homelessremembrance.org. And it's a close-up of multiple people dressed almost all in black, holding a single white flower each. There are buildings and an American flag in the background. And this is the women in black who set up remembrance ceremonies and events for those who pass away on the streets today. So all of this research started us thinking about, what does this mean in today's context? And how do we treat the dead and memorialization for those people who are lost on the margins now? And this is not only a hyper-local story, but also a strikingly universal one of colonization, forced industrialization, evolution of the landscape, as Carrie talked about, and marginalization in areas where new immigrants and minority groups often lived and continue to live. The silver lining for our story is that the auditor's report and investigative journalism did lead to reforms. Now, the King County Medical Examiner has a special indigent burial program in which they do have this lovely public ceremony every couple of years, honoring many different faiths even, and they keep the remains separated in case a family member does come forward to claim them. So the question then becomes, how do we memorialize those who are lost and help the public learn about it? And just to put into context how important and the challenges that people do have on the margins today, Jacob, our intern that's here and helping us, Jacob Neville, thank you so much, has been helping me dive into more research. Since I'm also a trained anthropologist, we want to make the connections to modern ethnographic research. We want to interview people on the margins today, see what their challenges are. Where are people being memorialized and how, and what ideas do we have for that? And so to put it into context, during a PIT, which is a point in time count, and this is data from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, in January 2024, 16,385 individuals were experiencing homelessness in King County. 60% were unsheltered, 40% were sheltered, and this was a 23% increase from the PIT count 2 years before even. And unfortunately, it's thought to be an undercount. And also, the demographic breakdown does disproportionately affect diverse groups, such as African American and Indigenous people. And not only are there challenges with being on the street, but they're often commingled with issues of mental health, struggles, and addiction as well. So we really want to bring everything around to show that these stories didn't just happen, 100 years ago, that this is still happening today, and what can we do about it?
So this is Carrie. So we hope that this time travel through Seattle's early days and back to the present has sparked some thoughts and considerations about how we honor the lost people from a cemetery erased by progress at all costs, in quotes. We welcome any questions from the audience after this slide, but some final thoughts and maybe some manifesting the lost Potter's Field. Like Elka mentioned, how do we memorialize those who are buried in a space that no longer exists? What would some kind of artistic, educational, or historic memorial look like for the lost Potter's Field? As we learned today, any relics, artifacts, or buildings from this time have been smoothed over, changed, or built on top of any of the locations related to this story. The Duwamish River dredging and straightening that started in 1913 in this location surely created a muddy, dusty, muddy mess that must have felt like Georgetown was completely upended. One idea is a more traditional plaque or interpretive sign, such as one for the Wayside Mission. Another is fixing up the street end, which is in this picture right here.
And you can see I have the Hard Island image in there because one thing we're thinking about is doing, I think you're going to mention it, right? Yeah. Augmented reality in the spaces potentially with our tour.
Yeah. Also, the support structure for people on the margins. In closing, we want to encourage you to do 3 things. Think about and research local history that you are passionate about. Volunteer your time or donate funds to help those living on the margins today. And how would you set up remembrance for the 3,260 people and their stories? So we welcome the public to help us think about this, what a memorial could look like, where it could be located, and how to fund such a fun project. And how do we share this story with more people? So we are planning an immersive walking tour this spring of the old crematorium space and the Potter's Field locations in Georgetown to try out some different types of storytelling styles, audiovisual and theatrical ways to bring these stories to life. Eventually, mobile accessible, like augmented reality content where people could use their phones or a tablet to see what is no longer there. And so Save the Date will send this out too for those that are interested. We'll be doing some walking tours starting at the end of April on April 25th, 26th, and 27th. Rain or shine, bring your own umbrella.
And I think we had one more picture. Yeah, there we go.
Oops.
When we were doing our King 5 tour right at the
yeah.
waterfront there. So one more picture and then.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
We're so
Thank you.
honored and thrilled to be with you. And thank you to MOHAI and thank you to HistoryLink. Thanks to those in the room. Thanks to people watching on YouTube. We love you, the people on the couch.
Thank you to Friends of Georgetown History that started all of this, basically our research, and was a catalyst in the beginning. So
Yeah. And we know we covered a lot of ground here,
yes.
literally.
Whew.
So if you
Thank you
want
for
to
sticking with us.
if you want to dig deeper into all these stories, we do produce a monthly podcast called Invisible Histories, wherever you get your podcasts. And the first 3 episodes from the beginning of last year go into depth of the stories we just covered tonight. So you can listen while you're doing the dishes and really dive into everything that happened at the Potter's Field. So yeah, we know where the stories are buried, and now so do you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation and performance. And it sounds like you are willing to take questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand so I can come to you with the microphone, because we are streaming this, and also for folks who might need help hearing, we've got captions, so raise your hand. If you're leaving, please take our survey. We like to know what you think.
And stop by our
employees in the
table
back
if
will
you
help
haven't
you with
yet.
that. Does anybody have a question?
So I'm really curious about. I'm curious about exactly where these things are compared to today, because I have a studio really close to there in Equinox Studios, and
Are you at Equinox?
I am, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I am too.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'll take you. We can go on a little private tour.
Great. But I'm wondering, like, on your website, are the maps there? Because if I could look at them more closely, I might be able
Yeah.
to kind of figure it out more.
Oops. Yeah. So if you want to type in the address on Google Maps or something, it's 500 South Myrtle Street in Seattle. It's right next to the Seattle Iron and Metals site. So it's that street of South Myrtle is really busy during the day, but in the evening it's actually there's nobody there usually, or maybe just some weird guy with his car. But yeah, go with a friend. Don't go alone. Please don't go alone at night. But and the old Potter's Field is underneath the business is called the Seattle Boiler Works. Yeah. So, I mean, I would not walk onto their property, unless you're going to go talk to them. But yeah, that's where, so basically after the Potter's Field was removed, the county sold off these industrial tracts, and they weren't the first business there, but a business moved in on top. Yeah.
And just briefly, so are the maps on your website? Or I'm also wondering about the core farm.
Our report is on the website, right? So
Yes, our report is on the website, and we can put something up there after. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. We love it.
Any other questions
Comments. We love comments.
or comments?
Yeah.
I'm coming your way, and then I'll get to you next.
Thank you for this presentation. It was super educational and entertaining.
Thank you.
You might have mentioned it, but how did it come up in the first place, that the idea that there even was a Potter's Field?
It basically came up because Carrie found that 1905 map, and it had county graveyard on it. And we started looking into that and found out about the Potter's Field, that it was a Potter's Field essentially. So, but that was the catalyst for it, was that 1905 map. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, but the county had already set up this graveyard that they called it the Duwamish Cemetery starting in 1876. So they knew they needed a place to bury people starting in 1876 and set up that land on the what was sort of the edge of the King County Poor Farm. Yeah, so the place existed starting then through 1912.
And why were you looking at those maps of that area?
Because it's like fed me. I was like so sad during the pandemic, and researching ghost stories like brought me life.
Oh, okay, so it's about,
I'm
researching the
a
ghost
weirdo.
stories that were
Yes,
just
I was
part of
researching
it.
ghost stories because at the time I was producing the Georgetown Haunted History Tour with Friends of Georgetown History, and so that's what we did, is look for stories. And there had been this like local lore that there had been bodies thrown in the river, and I was like, that could not be true, like what? And so, but then when I found the map from 1905 that showed the outline that said county graveyard, I was like, okay, we are onto something here. So
And then she convinced me to join her, yeah. And it's been, yes, and the rest is history. There was another question?
Thank you.
To it? Oh, yeah. Here.
sorry, could you use the mic?
Sure. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This history reminds us of how recently it was the Wild West, like a boat that's a hospital on the docks and such. When you saw the headline that they're going to relocate that, it was a short amount of time, not a lot of money going on, and then afterwards, this detailed report about moral outrage. But it feels like they were like, make it go away. They did. Is that the sense that you got too, that it was kind of that situation? Then afterwards, we got a little
Yeah,
more about it.
yeah, I mean, well, you know, one of the things I said is Madame Victoria is true too, actually. So even the people in Georgetown, residents weren't happy with having the graveyard there. So I think in a lot of ways, it wasn't just, one opinion, basically. There were a lot of people that were pretty upset about having it there. And so they didn't know how terrible, I mean, everything that was happening there was, or how terrible they would handle the cremation and columbarium storage, so that it ended up being a huge mess. But yeah, the public opinion, I mean, I think wasn't just that, oh yeah, we definitely need to have that there. It was definitely mixed, so. Did you want to add something?
Well, I just thought it was interesting. The county did spend quite a lot of money building the crematorium. They hired the Olmsted brothers. So like the intention was there to do the right thing, but somehow King County, there was no follow through on how it was implemented or oversight, or even saying, oh, let's just take all the ashes and inter them somewhere else, right? That's what you should do, is put them somewhere with a plaque, right? And even then, they were doing that for Civil War. You know, Civil War veterans have a cemetery here. So like, it was done, I think, just in this case, it didn't work. So.
So you mentioned, it's been mentioned several times, that the Olmsted brothers were involved in landscape. Do we have any photographs of, I mean, did it even get built? Was it just a plan that didn't get implemented?
We can't find a photo of the Potter's Field itself. So even though Ashel Curtis
But there must have been photographs of the crematorium.
Well, we haven't found any yet, other than those sketches from the newspaper.
Wow.
We are intrigued because the Ashel Curtis photo collection is at the Washington State History Museum, and they're digitizing it. So I'm like, it's my holy grail, like that in a box somewhere, because he took pictures of the farm and the hospital and the buildings and the cow and the thing, and like, if he had just turned like this and taken a picture, that's the Potter's Field was right over there. So I'm hopeful that just because no one knew, if they saw the photo, they wouldn't really know what they're seeing, so it could just end up in a drawer somewhere. That's my hope, is there is a picture of it. And yeah, maybe the crematorium too. And I just don't think they probably planted the crematorium. I don't know, who knows? Or took care of the plant. They probably planted it and then all the plants died because nobody takes care of plants.
The crematorium was there a long time, so you're right. There probably are photos of that somewhere, because they didn't dismantle it till 1941. So it's kind of amazing to think about that fancy building being there, and like that's what they put their money into. It's just all throughout the story, like the other gentleman was saying, it just seems like sometimes their intention was in the right place, but it just didn't go well, or they didn't follow through, which sounds like similar to some stuff that happens today, right? I mean, it still is happening.
If nothing else, you should be able to find some aerial photograph that would at least show if the landscaping happened.
Oh, right, because yeah, that time period, when was it, the 30s or the 40s, when they were definitely doing a lot of aerial photography during that. Yeah, we should definitely look for that. I know, take mental notes for what to include next time, right? Thank you, appreciate that. Anybody else?
I'm
Don't be
going to
shy.
do like 3 spins
Yeah.
to see if
There
I
you go, to
see
see if anybody-
any
Oh my
more
gosh.
hands, and then if I don't, we will say goodnight. I think this is the 3rd spin. All right, thank you,
so much,
everybody.
everybody, thank you. Yeah.
Please come back next month. Next month is going to be Hidden Echoes of Vietnam in Seattle, which will feature artifacts and stories from community archives and personal collections, some of which have not been seen widely before. And yeah, round of applause for the speakers again. Keep an eye out for information about their tour. We would love you to answer our survey. We've got postcards to give you, as well as, if you want, you can enter a raffle for free admission to MOHAI. We do those drawings quarterly. And I believe that's it. Check out our website for our other upcoming programs. Come back, see the exhibits, and have a lovely evening, everyone.